What if everything you've been told about success is a carefully constructed lie? We're all taught to chase the spotlight, the promotion, the applause, but what if the price of catching it is losing yourself completely? This is the unbelievable story of a world-famous singer who had it all, and then, in an instant, it was gone. The famous singer loses voice, and the world saw it as a tragedy. But here is the controversial truth: hitting rock bottom was the best thing that ever happened. To her, it was the only way she could finally escape the cage of her own fame. Crushed, she flees to a coast village, a place where no one knew her name or her silence. And it's there that the most counterintuitive part of her journey begins. The person who would ultimately heal her wasn't a world-class doctor or a therapist. It was a local fisher who doesn't know her and who, through his own simple, quiet life, teaches her a new song. This part of the story is the ultimate proof that your true voice isn't found on a stage, but in the silence when you finally stop performing for everyone else. But just when she finds this fragile piece, her past comes crashing back in. The media finds her, exposing her sanctuary to the world and forcing her into an impossible choice: comeback or let go. Her record label demands she return for a massive tour, promising more fame and money than ever before. But returning means leaving behind the only man who ever saw her soul before her spotlight, challenging the very idea of love before identity. This isn't just a story about losing a voice. It's about the brutal battle to choose which voice to listen to. Stay with us for this incredible journey from the stage to the shoreline. And hey, while you're here, if you believe in authenticity over applause, make sure you follow the channel so you don't miss what's next. Share this with someone who needs to hear this message. And I'd love to see where this story is reaching. Drop your city or country in the comments below. You know, it's funny how the universe has a way of hitting the reset button on you, whether you want it to or not. Just picture it: you're on top of the world, your name in shining lights, your voice filling stadiums. That was the life of Zoe Harris, a force of nature whose entire identity was wrapped up in every single note she could hit. The applause wasn't just noise, it was the air she breathed. But as they say, the bigger you are, the harder you fall. For her, the fall wasn't a stumble, it was a deafening silence. The moment a singer loses voice became her headline reality. It's the kind of thing you think only happens in the movies. Her life was this perfectly orchestrated symphony, each day a new melody of success and adoration. She lived for the sound, for that electric vibration of a crowd singing her words back to her. Now try to imagine if the one tool that defines you, the very thing that makes you you, just stopped working. For a master painter, it'd be losing their sight. For an athlete, their legs. For Zoe, it was this forced quietude, a crystal castle shattering into a million silent pieces. The doctors used cold, clinical words like severe vocal fold hemorrhage, terms that felt so small compared to the gaping hole they left in her soul. It wasn't just about not being able to sing, it was about losing herself entirely. It's like her loud heart, the most vibrant part of her being, was suddenly trapped in a soundproof box, beating frantically but unable to make a sound. She'd look in the mirror and see a stranger, an empty shell of the woman who once set stages on fire, making her dream of authenticity over applause feel like a cruel joke. And the pressure? Oh, it was immense. The record label, the fans, the media, everyone wanted a piece of her, an explanation, a promise of a comeback. But how can you promise a return when you don't even recognize the person you've become? Every unanswered phone call, every news report just tightened the knot in her stomach. She felt like a broken product that everyone was scrambling to either fix or discard. The life that was once a spotlight became four quiet walls, where the only sound was the buzz of her own doubt and fear. But in that crushing silence, a painful truth started to bubble to the surface, the kind of epiphany that only comes from true hardship. Maybe this wasn't the end, but a symptom. a symptom of a life lived on the edge, always for others, for the image, for the next hit single. She realized it had been years since Shed truly sung for herself. The relentless pursuit of fame had made her forget about the soul before spotlight. And in a way, her body finally put its foot down and said, "No more." It's at that breaking point where the most profound transformations begin, isn't it? When everything you know has crumbled, you have two choices: stay and try to glue the pieces back together, or walk away and find new material to rebuild yourself from scratch. For Zoe Harris, the noise of her world was just too loud to hear any answers. The idea of a quiet life began to whisper in her mind, not as a defeat, but as a lifeline, a chance to find out who she was when there was no microphone in her hand. So there she was, at a crossroads most of us can barely imagine. What do you do when the one thing that defined you is gone? You can't just go back to being normal when your face is plastered everywhere. For Zoe, the only answer was to disappear. This wasn't just a vacation, it was a full-blown coastal escape, a desperate run for the hills, or in her case, the shore. She packed a single bag, took out all the cash she could, and drove until the city lights were a faint memory, a bad dream she was trying to outrun. She adopted a new name, Zoe, a simpler version of her old self, shedding the Harris like a heavy winter coat. Becoming famous in hiding is a strange art form. It's about learning to be invisible in plain sight, to nod politely at strangers instead of smiling for cameras. She chose a forgotten town on the coast, a place where the biggest news was the high tide. It was the perfect antidote to her chaotic life, a real-life transition from stage to shoreline, where no one would look at her twice. Her past was a secret she guarded with her life. Think about the sheer relief of that. Imagine walking into a small cafe and the only thing the person behind the counter cares about is whether you want cream or sugar. No autographs, no invasive questions, no expectations. For the first time in over a decade, she wasn't Zoe Harris, the superstar. She was just Zoe, a woman with tired eyes and a story she wasn't telling. This newfound anonymity was the first layer of her healing, a chance to finally breathe without feeling like the whole world was watching. The move was a deliberate search for a quiet life, a concept that seemed almost mythical before. Her days, once filled with studio sessions and interviews, were now marked by the rhythm of the waves and the cry of seagulls. The silence she had once feared became her sanctuary. It was a place where she didn't have to pretend, where the lack of a voice wasn't a tragedy, but simply a fact. She could just be. It was a strange and unfamiliar peace, but it was real. Of course, you can't just erase who you are. There were moments of sheer panic, a jolt of fear when she'd hear one of her old songs playing faintly from a passing car. It was a ghost from a past life, a reminder of the singer loses voice saga she was so desperate to leave behind. Each time, she'd pull the collar of her jacket a little tighter, sink a little deeper into her new, invisible identity, praying no one would make the connection between the global icon and the quiet woman buying groceries next to them. But this escape wasn't about hiding forever. Deep down, it was a pilgrimage. It was a quest to find out if there was anything left of her once you stripped away the fame, the applause, and the voice. She was shedding her old skin, layer by painful layer, hoping to find something more authentic underneath. This quiet, salty air was the beginning of her search, a search for a new self, far from the life that had almost broken her completely. In a place built on simplicity, you're bound to meet people who embody it. That's where Caleb Howard comes into the picture. He wasn't a star, a producer, or a critic. He was a fisherman, plain and simple. His hands were calloused from ropes and nets, not from clapping in a VIP section. His office was the vast open ocean, and his schedule was dictated by the tides, not by a tour manager. He was the living, breathing definition of a life stripped down to the essentials, a stark contrast to everything Zoe had ever known. Their first meeting was nothing dramatic. No sparks in the traditional sense, just a simple human interaction. She was by the docks, watching the boats come in, and he was unloading his catch. He offered a simple hello, not because he wanted something, but because that's what people did there. He had absolutely no clue who she was. To him, she was just a newcomer with a quiet sadness in her eyes, another soul drawn to the sea. This was the first hint of a fisherman's love, though neither of them knew it yet. This ignorance of his was the greatest gift he could have possibly given her. In her old life, everyone knew her story before she even said a word. People saw the celebrity, the brand, the icon. Caleb just saw Zoe, a woman who seemed a little lost. This was the beginning of a connection based on love before identity, a bond forming without the heavy baggage of her past. He was intrigued by her silence, but he didn't push. He just accepted it as part of who she was. You see, his world was built on a different kind of value system. Success wasn't measured in album sales or social media followers. It was a good catch, a sturdy boat, and a sunset shared with a friend. This was healing through simplicity in its purest form. He found joy in the mending of a net, the hum of his boat's engine, the taste of the salt in the air. He was showing her, without even trying, that a life could be full without being loud, a lesson her loud heart desperately needed to learn. Caleb represented an authenticity she had been craving for years. He wasn't trying to be anyone other than himself. There was no performance, no mask. What you saw was what you got. This was so different from her world, where every smile, every wave, every note was scrutinized and polished for public consumption. His simple, honest existence was like a mirror, showing her just how far she had drifted from her own true north in her quest for applause. And so, this quiet encounter on the docks planted a seed. It was a seed of curiosity, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life here. A life where she wasn't defined by her past or her silenced voice, but by the person she was becoming. He didn't know he was meeting a superstar who was famous in hiding. He just knew he'd met someone interesting. And for her, that was more than enough. There's a certain magic in physical work, isn't there? It gets you out of your head and into your body. Zoe, who had spent a lifetime creating with her voice, found herself drawn to Caleb's world of tangible effort. Intrigued by the quiet confidence he carried, she made a hesitant offer one morning. "Do you need a hand?" She expected him to laugh or politely decline, but Caleb just shrugged and nodded toward his boat. For him, an extra pair of hands was just that practical help, not a complicated social maneuver. So began her new routine. Her days shifted from stage to shoreline in the most literal way possible. Instead of sound checks, she was checking bait. Instead of encore calls, she was coiling ropes. The work was hard, repetitive, and completely unfamiliar. Her muscles ached in ways she never knew they could, and her hands, once insured for millions, became rough and stained with salt and fish. But with every ache, a little bit of the old tension seemed to drain away from her. This was healing through simplicity in action. You can't dwell on a lost career when you're focused on not getting tangled in a net or trying to bait a hook correctly. The ocean demanded her full attention. It didn't care who she used to be. It was a powerful, humbling force, and Caleb moved with it, not against it. Watching him, she learned that peace wasn't about having no problems, but about knowing how to navigate the storm and the calm with the same steady hand. He taught her without teaching. He'd show her how to mend a tear in the net, his large hands moving with a surprising gentleness. He'd point out different types of fish, explaining their habits with a quiet passion. He never asked about her past or why she never spoke above a whisper. He simply accepted her presence, her silent partnership. This was a new kind of collaboration, one that didn't require a voice, just a willingness to show up and do the work. Think of it like learning a new language, not of words, but of action. For example, when you're learning to cook, You don't just read a recipe, you feel the dough, smell the spices, see the colors change. Zoe was learning the language of the sea. She was learning that her value wasn't tied to a performance. Her contribution was real and immediate. A mended net meant a better catch, which meant a good day's work. It was a direct line between effort and result, something she hadn't felt in years. This daily ritual on the boat became her therapy. The rhythmic work, the vastness of the ocean, and Caleb's steady, uncomplicated presence were slowly stitching her back together. She wasn't just a singer loses voice anymore, she was a deckhand, a helper, a person learning a new trade. She was finding a new purpose, one calloused hand at a time, and it was a purpose that had absolutely nothing to do with fame. The most revolutionary thing Caleb did for Zoe was something he didn't do. He didn't treat her like she was special. In his eyes, she wasn't a fragile, broken star or a mysterious woman with a secret. She was Zoe, the quiet lady who was surprisingly good at gutting fish once she got the hang of it. He'd tease her for being slow with a knot or praise her for spotting a good fishing spot, the same way he would with any other crewmate. It was this beautiful, ordinary treatment that she had craved for so long. This was the ultimate expression of love before identity. He was getting to know her, stubborn, resilient, surprisingly funny woman who showed up every day at the ghost of her past. Her silence wasn't a disability to him, it was just a characteristic, like his own quiet nature or his habit of whistling when he was focused. He didn't try to fix her or fill the silence with meaningless chatter. He simply made space for it, allowing her to be exactly as she was. Imagine the freedom in that. For years, every interaction Zoe had was colored by her fame. People either wanted something from her or were too intimidated to be themselves. It's like wearing a sign that says, "Handle with care," or "Warning celebrity." But Caleb didn't see the sign, he just saw the person. This allowed a genuine part of her personality to resurface, a part that had been buried under the weight of being Zoe Harris. The pursuit of authenticity over applause was finally becoming her reality, without her even trying. There's a powerful lesson in this, you know. It's about the importance of seeing people for who they are in the present moment. Think about how we often judge people based on their job, their past, or what we've heard about them. We create a story in our heads before we even know them. Caleb operated without any of that prejudice. His view was clear, unclouded by the static of fame, making him the one person on earth who could see her without the filter of her celebrity. He didn't know she was famous in hiding. He didn't know her voice had sold millions of albums. When Shed hummed quietly to herself, a habit she couldn't break, he'd just smile and say, "That's a nice little tune," completely unaware that he was hearing a melody from a Grammy-winning artist. This innocent validation was worth more to her than a stadium full of cheering fans, because it was pure. It was for her, not for the icon. And so, in this simple, unassuming friendship, Zoe was being rebuilt. He treated her not as a project or a puzzle, but as an equal. His unwitting gift was the space for her to exist without the crushing weight of her own legacy. He wasn't trying to heal her, and yet, he was the most healing presence she had ever known. He was laying the foundation for a new life, one where she was seen, heard in her silence, and valued for simply being. It's funny how we spend so much of our lives chasing the extraordinary. We forget the simple beauty of the ordinary. Zoe's life had been a series of grand gestures, chart-topping hits, sold-out tours, red carpets. But here, in this coastal village, joy came in smaller, quieter packages. It was the taste of coffee from the old pot in her small rented cottage, the warmth of the sun on her face as she sat on the pier, the salty smell of the air that filled her lungs. These simple pleasures were slowly waking up a part of her that had been dormant for years. This was the true healing through simplicity. It wasn't some grand, dramatic cure. It was a slow, steady immersion in a life that was real and unpretentious. She started to find a rhythm that had nothing to do with an album release cycle. It was the rhythm of the town, the morning rush at the bakery, the quiet afternoons when the fishing boats were out, the lively evenings at the local pub. She was no longer an observer of life, she was a participant in it. She found herself smiling at things that would have been invisible to her before. A flock of sandpipers skittering along the water's edge, the way the fog rolled in and hugged the coastline, the laughter of children playing by the docks. Her focus was shifting from the internal noise of her failure and loss to the external beauty of the world around her. This was the essence of her quiet life, a life rich in detail, not drama. It was about finding the soul before spotlight, and she was discovering that her soul was content with so much less. Think about the concept of mindfulness, of being present in the moment. That's what this village was teaching her, without a single textbook or guru. It's one thing to read about it, but it's another to live it. For example, instead of just eating, she was tasting the fresh fish Caleb would bring back, noticing the texture and the flavor. Instead of just walking, she was feeling the sand under her feet. It was a sensory reawakening, a powerful reminder that there is so much life to be lived outside of a career. This rediscovery of joy was subtle. It wasn't a sudden burst of happiness, but a gentle growing warmth in her chest. She was learning that her worth wasn't tied to a chart position or a critic's review. Her worth was inherent, present in her ability to appreciate a sunset or share a quiet meal with a friend. The relentless pressure for authenticity over applause was fading because, for the first time, there was no one to applaud. There was only life in its most basic and beautiful form. And as this quiet joy began to fill the spaces that grief had carved out, something inside her started to shift. The hard shell she had built around her loud heart began to soften. She wasn't just surviving her silence anymore, she was starting to thrive in it. She was learning that a fulfilling life didn't require a stage, only an open heart and a willingness to see the beauty right in front of her. Music had become a minefield for Zoe. Hearing a pop song on the radio was like a phantom limb ache, a painful reminder of the world she'd lost. It was the soundtrack to her failure. But one evening, something different happened. She was walking past the small village tavern, and a sound drifted out, not the polished, overproduced sound of her old life, but something raw, acoustic, and steeped in tradition. It was a group of locals playing folk music, their voices weaving together in a story of the sea. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the music didn't hurt. It didn't trigger a sense of loss. Instead, it sparked something else, something deep inside her. This was music without fame. It wasn't for a record deal or a screaming audience. It was for the joy of it, for the community, for the sharing of a story. The melodies were simple, born from generations of fishermen and their families, full of heartache, hope, and the rhythm of the tides she now knew so well. She stood there in the shadows, listening, and felt a profound emotional stir. It was like a frozen river inside her beginning to thaw. The music was honest. It was flawed. A voice might crack, a guitar string might buzz, but none of it mattered because the emotion was real. It was everything she had secretly yearned for in her own career. That raw connection that gets lost somewhere between the recording booth and the marketing department. This was the ultimate display of authenticity over applause. It's like when you've only eaten processed, packaged food for years, and then someone gives you a fresh, sun-ripened tomato right from the vine. The flavor is so intense, so real, it reminds you what food is supposed to taste like. This folk music was that tomato for Zoe's soul. It was reminding her what music was supposed to feel like, reconnecting her to the very reason she started singing as a little girl in her bedroom, long before anyone knew her name. This experience planted a tiny, hopeful seed for a voice rediscovered. It wasn't about hitting the high notes or recapturing her old power. It was about the possibility of making a sound that was true, a sound that came from this new person, she. was becoming. The music of the village wasn't about perfection, it was about expression. And for the first time, she felt a flicker of desire to express herself again. Not for a crowd, but for the sake of the song itself. She didn't go inside the tavern that night. She just listened from a distance, letting the raw, heartfelt music wash over her. It was a turning point, a quiet moment of revelation. The music of the world had been a source of pain, but the music of this tiny, forgotten village was offering a path back. Not to who she was, but to who she could become. It was the first note in what could be a brand new song, new self. Healing of a voice, much like the healing of a heart, doesn't happen overnight. It's not a switch you can just flip. For Zoe, it began not with scales or vocal exercises, but with humming. As she worked on the boat with Caleb or walked along the beach alone, she'd find herself humming the simple folk tunes she'd heard. The melodies now a part of her internal landscape. It was unconscious at first, a quiet vibration in her chest. A sound meant for no one but herself. This was the slow, tentative process of a voice rediscovered. It wasn't the powerful, stadium-filling instrument of her past. This voice was small, fragile, and raspy from disuse. But the most important thing was that it was free. There was no pressure, no expectation. She wasn't trying to perform or impress. She was simply letting the sound emerge naturally, like a spring bubbling up from the ground after a long drought. It was her own secret, a quiet joy she nurtured in solitude. Think of it like tending to a delicate plant. You can't force it to grow by pulling on its leaves. You just have to give it the right conditions: good soil, water, and sunlight. The village, Caleb, and the honest music were her sunlight and water. She was slowly creating an environment where her voice felt safe enough to show itself again. This wasn't about a comeback, it was about a reawakening. It was about finding a new song, new self, one breath at a time. Gradually, the humming turned into soft singing, barely above a whisper. She'd sing to the waves, her words swallowed by the sound of the surf. It was a release, a way to let go of the fear that had kept her silent for so long. Her new voice was different, lower, breathier, with a texture that held the grain of her grief and the salt of the sea. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. It was honest. And in its own quiet way, it was more beautiful than any note she had ever sung on stage. This slow return of her voice was deeply connected to her emotional healing. She was learning to trust herself again, to believe that she was more than her fame and more than her failure. Each quiet note was an act of defiance against the silence, a testament to her resilience. It was the purest form of authenticity over applause, because the only audience was the ocean, and it demanded nothing from her but her truth. So, her voice came back, not with a roar, but with a whisper. It was a whisper that carried the weight of her journey from the dazzling heights of fame to the quiet depths of her own soul. It was a voice that was no longer a tool for a career, but an expression of her very being. The Singer Loses Voice chapter was ending, and a new one, quieter but infinitely more profound, was just beginning. One evening, a chill had settled over the coast, the kind that makes you want to be near a fire. Caleb had built a small bonfire on the beach, and they sat there, watching the flames dance against the dark sky. It was a comfortable silence, the kind they had shared many times. But tonight was different. Feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible, Zoe began to sing, her voice barely more than a breath of air. It was one of the folk songs from the village, a simple, haunting melody. She wasn't performing. Her eyes were closed, her mind on the story of the song, not on the listener. It was a private moment she was, for the first time, willing to share. When she finished, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant wash of the waves. She held her breath, a flicker of old fear returning. Then, Caleb turned to her, a soft smile on his face. "You have a really lovely voice, Zoe," he said, His words simple, direct, and utterly sincere. That was it. That was the moment. He didn't say, "Wow, you should be a star," or "You sound like a professional." He just said it was lovely. It was a compliment, stripped of all expectation and industry comparison. He was complimenting her, the woman he knew, not the global superstar he didn't. This was the ultimate validation of music without fame. It was a pure, human response to a beautiful sound, and it landed directly in her heart. This simple act of kindness was more powerful than any standing ovation. Why? Because it was built on a foundation of love before identity. He was appreciating the raw, unfiltered sound that came from her, completely unaware that this same voice had once been insured for millions of dollars and broadcast to the world. His compliment wasn't tainted by fame or potential. It was just the truth as he heard it. It was the first time she felt her new, fragile voice was truly heard. Imagine you've been working on a secret project, something deeply personal that you're terrified to show anyone. And the first person you show it to doesn't just like it, they get it, for all the right reasons. That's what this moment was for Zoe. It was the confirmation she needed that her new sound, this quiet, honest expression, had value. It wasn't a lesser version of her old voice. It was something new and whole in its own right. And in that moment by the fire, with the stars overhead and the warmth of his simple, honest words, something shifted between them. The friendship that had been her anchor began to deepen into something more. The fisherman's love that had been a quiet undercurrent was now starting to surface. His compliment wasn't just about her voice. It was about him seeing her, truly seeing her, and loving what he saw and heard. That night by the fire was a turning point. The compliment about her voice wasn't the cause of their love, but it was the moment the door creaked open for it to walk through. Their connection, which had been slowly building on the steady foundation of shared work and quiet companionship, finally blossomed into love. It was a love that felt incredibly safe because it had been built in the right order. It was a fisherman's love, born of the sea, steady and deep. The foundation of their relationship was trust, not image. He fell in love with Zoe, the quiet, resilient woman who could mend a net and had a secret, lovely singing voice. She fell in love with Caleb, the honest, kind man who saw her worth when she couldn't see it herself. Her past as a celebrity was completely irrelevant. This was the epitome of love before identity. Their bond was forged in the reality of their present, not the ghost of her past. Think about how most relationships in the modern world start. We scroll through profiles, look at curated pictures, and read carefully crafted bios. We build an image in our head before we even meet the person. Caleb and Zoe did the opposite. They got to know the messy, real, unedited versions of each other first. Their love story wasn't written in status updates and glamorous photos. It was written in shared sunrises on the ocean and quiet evenings by the fire. Their love was a testament to authenticity over applause. In her old life, love always felt conditional, tangled up with her fame, her success, her public persona. Men were in love with the idea of Zoe Harris, but Caleb was in love with the feeling of being with Zoe. He loved her for her quiet strength, her unexpected humor, and the way her eyes lit up when she talked about the sea. It had nothing to do with the stage and everything to do with the soul before spotlight. She found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone else. She still didn't tell him about her past, not because she wanted to deceive him, but because she was terrified of that world crashing into this one. She was afraid that knowing who she was would change the way he looked at her, and she couldn't bear to lose the one person who saw her so clearly. Their love was her sanctuary, and she guarded it fiercely. So they built a life together, simple and true. It was a love that healed the last of her broken pieces. With him, she wasn't the singer loses voice. She was just a woman who had found her voice again, in more ways than one. She was loved for who she was right now in this moment. And for the first time, she felt completely, unconditionally whole, wrapped in a love that was as real and reliable as the tides. With her heart healing and her voice returning, the music began to flow out of Zoe. But this wasn't the slick, radio-friendly pop of her past. This was something entirely different. Her new song, New Self, was taking shape, and it sounded like the life she was now living. Her new music was raw, stripped down, and deeply organic. It was inspired by the rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore, the haunting cry of the gulls, and the ancient folk melodies that echoed through the village. Her songwriting, once a collaborative effort in sterile studios with a dozen co-writers, was now a solitary act. She wrote on the back of receipts, on driftwood, on whatever was nearby when inspiration struck. The lyrics were no longer about glamour or heartbreak in the abstract. They were about the feeling of salt on her skin, the strength in Caleb's hands, the quiet dignity of a life lived simply. It was music born from experience, not from a marketing brief. This was her voice rediscovered in its most authentic form. The ocean became her greatest collaborator. Its moods, from placid calm to raging storm, became metaphors for her own journey. You could hear the rhythm of the tides in her guitar playing, and the vast, open space of the sea in her melodies. She was weaving the sounds of her new world into the fabric of her art. This wasn't a calculated reinvention, it was an honest reflection of who she had become. It was the sound of a woman moving from stage to shoreline and finding her true artistic home. This new sound was the ultimate rejection of her old life's values. It was pure authenticity over applause. She wasn't thinking about hooks or bridges, or what would top the charts. She was thinking about what felt true. For instance, think of an artist like Bon Iver, who famously recorded his debut album in a secluded cabin. The isolation and the environment became part of the music. For Zoe, the coastal village and the ocean were her cabin, infusing her sound with a raw, undeniable sense of place. Her voice itself was transformed. The old, powerful belt was gone, replaced by something more intimate and textured. It held a newfound vulnerability, but also a quiet strength. It was the voice of someone who had been broken and had healed, and the cracks were still there, but they made the voice more beautiful, not less. It was the sound of the soul before spotlight, a voice that no longer needed to shout to be heard. She recorded these new songs on a simple handheld device, just her and her guitar. The recordings were imperfect, with the sound of the wind or a distant foghorn sometimes bleeding in. But these imperfections were what made them so real. She was capturing moments, not manufacturing products. This new body of work was a secret diary set to music, a testament to her healing and the quiet, profound life she had built from the ashes of her old one. In the digital age, no secret is safe forever. The bubble of peace that Zoe had so carefully constructed was burst by a single careless click. A tourist visiting the village for a weekend was captivated by the sight of a woman singing softly to herself on the pier. He didn't know who she was, only that the moment was beautiful. He snapped a photo, uploaded it to his social media with a caption like, "Incredible hidden gem of a singer in this tiny fishing village," and thought nothing more of it. But the internet has a long memory and a billion eyes. The photo, blurry and taken from a distance, was just enough. A fan saw it, then another. The facial recognition algorithms did the rest. Within hours, the question was trending, is this Zoe Harris? Her famous in hiding status was instantly revoked. The quiet sanctuary she had found was about to become the center of a media storm, proving that you can run from your past, but you can't always hide. The first sign of trouble was a single car with blacked-out windows rolling slowly through the village, then another. By the next morning, it was a full-blown invasion. Paparazzi with long-lens cameras were hiding in the dunes. Reporters were shoving microphones in the faces of bewildered locals, asking about the mysterious Zoe. The media finds her, and they descended on the small, quiet town like a flock of vultures, hungry for the story. For Zoe, it was her worst nightmare come true. The noise, the cameras, the questions, it was the very world she had fled, now crashing down on her peaceful existence. Her quiet life was shattered. She felt the old panic rising, the feeling of being a hunted animal. Her home, once a safe haven, now felt like a cage. The simple act of walking to the store became an ordeal, a gauntlet of flashing lights and shouted questions about her voice, her disappearance, and her inevitable comeback. This sudden exposure threw everything into chaos. Her new identity, so carefully nurtured, was ripped away, replaced by the glaring headline "Singer Loses Voice Found." The narrative she had escaped was being forced back upon her. The world didn't care about her healing or her newfound peace. They wanted the drama, the comeback story, the next chapter in the saga of Zoe Harris. Her personal journey was about to be turned into public entertainment. And in the middle of this whirlwind stood Caleb, utterly bewildered. He watched as the woman he loved, his quiet Zoe, was swarmed and hounded. He saw the terror in her eyes and the name they were all shouting at her. The secret she had kept for so long was now out, not on her terms, but in the most brutal way imaginable. The life they had built together was now standing directly in the path of a hurricane. The media frenzy was just the beginning. Once the world knew where she was, her old life came knocking loudly. The phone she had kept turned off for months started ringing. It was her old manager, her agent, and most importantly, the head of her record label. The tone wasn't one of concern for her well-being, it was one of opportunity. They didn't see a woman who had been healing, they saw a product that was suddenly back on the market, hotter than ever. The demand was clear and immediate, a comeback tour. The story is perfect, her manager had exclaimed over the phone. The fallen star, the mysterious disappearance, the triumphant return. We can sell this, Zoe. This is the biggest comeback story in a decade. They already had a title for it, The Voice Rediscovered Tour. They were trying to package and sell the most painful and personal journey of her life, turning her authentic healing into a marketing angle. This was the ultimate test, the final battle. In her long war between her inner self and her public persona, the choice was start comeback or let go. The world was offering her everything she once thought she wanted: the stage, the adoration, the validation of millions. The label promised her top producers, a massive budget, and a tour that would solidify her legendary status. It was a siren song, promising a return to glory, a chance to reclaim her throne. But Zoe was a different person now. The thought of stepping back into that machine filled her not with excitement, but with a deep, gut-wrenching dread. Could she go back to singing for the applause after learning to sing for herself? Could she sacrifice the soul before spotlight? All over again? The very idea felt like a betrayal of the quiet, truthful life she had built. A betrayal of the new song, new self that had emerged from the silence. The pressure was immense, a full-court press from the machinery of fame. They sent contracts, mock-up posters, and financial projections that were staggering. They tried to remind her of who she was, of the power she wielded, of the life she had worked so hard to achieve. It's like an ex showing up and reminding you of all the good times, making you forget why you broke up in the first place. The label was trying to make her forget the pain, the emptiness, and the reason she had to flee. She was standing on a cliff's edge. On one side was the roaring, chaotic, and incredibly seductive world of fame and fortune. On the other was a quiet, simple life with a man who loved her for who she was. A life where she was finally, truly happy. The world wanted the old Zoe Harris back, the superstar with the powerful voice. But the question that echoed in her own heart was, did she? While the world was celebrating the return of a star, Caleb's world was falling apart. He stood on the sidelines of the media circus, watching the woman he knew as Zoe get consumed by a person named Zoe Harris. The reporters, the headlines, the old music videos people were playing on their phone as it was a tidal wave of information that completely drowned the quiet, simple truth of the life they had built together. He was stunned, his mind reeling as he tried to connect the two identities. The shock quickly curdled into a feeling of betrayal. It wasn't that she was famous, he couldn't care less about that. The betrayal was in the secret itself. Their entire relationship, the very foundation of their fisherman's love, was built on honesty and trust. Or so he thought. Now he realized their connection was built on a lie of omission. He had shared every part of his simple life with her, while she had hidden the single biggest part of hers. He felt like a fool. Every intimate moment they had shared was now cast in a different light. When she sang for him by the fire, was she just practicing? When he complimented her lovely voice, was she laughing at him on the inside, knowing that voice had won awards and sold out arenas? The purity of their shared experiences was suddenly tainted by her secret. The love before identity that he cherished now felt like a cruel joke, because he never even knew her true identity. The confrontation was quiet, but devastating. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice thick with a pain she had never heard before. "Did you think I wouldn't understand? Or did you just not trust me?" He wasn't angry about the fame, he was hurt by the lack of faith in him, in what they had. He had fallen in love with a woman he thought was genuine, only to find out she was a character, a person famous in hiding. For Caleb, a man whose life was defined by what was real and tangible, this deception cut deep. It made him question everything. Was any of it real? Did she ever truly love him? Or was he just a convenient part of her coastal escape, a prop in her story of recovery? He looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't see the Zoe he loved. He saw a stranger, a world-famous celebrity who had let him fall in love with a ghost. This was a fracture far more serious than the media invasion. The paparazzi she could ignore, the record label she could refuse. But the look of betrayal in Caleb's eyes was something she couldn't run from. The safe harbor she had found in his love was now a raging storm, and she was the one who had caused it. She had protected her secret so fiercely that she had ended up wounding the one person she never wanted to hurt. The storm had finally arrived, both outside her door and inside her heart. The two worlds she had tried so desperately to keep separate had collided in the most spectacular and painful way. On one hand, the record label was calling, offering a kingdom of fame and fortune, a chance to be adored by millions again. On the other, the man she loved was looking at her with the eyes of a stranger, his trust shattered. The choice before her was brutal in its simplicity: come back or let go. This wasn't just a career choice, it was a choice of identity. To go back would be to reclaim the persona of Zoe Harris, the superstar. It meant embracing the spotlight, the pressure, the endless cycle of performance and validation. It meant accepting the world's definition of success. But she had learned that success and happiness were not the same thing. The applause of the crowd was loud, but it had never made her feel truly heard. To stay meant fighting for the life she had built. It meant trying to repair the trust she had broken with Caleb. It meant embracing a future without stadiums and headlines. A quiet, simple life where the only applause came from the crashing waves. It meant choosing the quiet life, a life where she was loved for her authentic self, not for her image. It was a choice between the soul before spotlight and the dazzling glare of fame. She thought about what it meant to be truly heard. On stage, 1 million people heard her voice, but did any of them hear her? Did they hear the doubt, the fear, the yearning for something real? No, they heard a flawless product. By the fire, with Caleb, her voice was quiet, imperfect, and fragile. But he had heard her. He had heard the soul behind the sound. It was a profound difference, the kind that changes a person's entire understanding of connection. The decision was a battle between her past and her future. It's a choice many of us face in smaller ways every day, isn't it? The safe, familiar job versus the risky passion project. The relationship that looks good on paper versus the one that actually feeds your soul. It always comes down to a choice between fear and authenticity. Zoe had to decide if she was going to let the ghost of her past dictate her future. Was she going to choose authenticity over applause for good this time? The world waited with bated breath. The media had their narrative ready, the triumphant return of a fallen angel. But Zoe was no longer playing a part in their story. She had to write her own ending. The choice wasn't just about her career or her love life. It was about honoring the incredible, painful, and beautiful journey she had been on since the day her voice first left her. It was about choosing the woman she had become over the star she once was. In the end, the choice became surprisingly clear. After the storm of indecision, a profound calm settled over Zoe. She had already lost her voice once she wasn't about to lose her soul. She made a single phone call to her manager, her words quiet but unwavering. "No," she said, "in not coming back." She walked away from the comeback tour, from the record deal, from the entire glittering, hollow machine. She chose to let go, not as a defeat, but as the ultimate victory. She chose love. She turned her back on the cameras and walked straight to Caleb, ready to face the mess she had made. She didn't have a perfect excuse, only the raw, unvarnished truth. She told him everything: the pressure, the emptiness, the fear that drove her into hiding, and the terror of losing him, the only real thing in her life. It was a conversation built not on her old fame, but on her new, hard-won honesty. It was the first song of her new song, new self, and it was sung just for him. And Caleb, a man who valued truth above all else, listened. He saw the genuine remorse in her eyes and heard the sincerity in her quiet voice. The healing wasn't instant, but it was possible. Her choicito, give up a world of fame for a simple life with him, was the loudest, clearest testament to her love he could ever imagine. It was the final, definitive proof of love before identity, because she had chosen his love over her old identity. She embraced a life where she was truly heard. Her audience was no longer millions of strangers, but a small circle of friends, the rolling ocean, and the man she loved. She chose authenticity over applause, finding more joy in a shared laugh in their small kitchen than she ever had from a stadium's roar. Her quiet life was her new stage, and it was grander than any she had left behind because it was real. Her voice, born from silence, became her own. It was no longer a tool for fame, but a gift for connection. She played her raw, ocean-inspired songs at the local tavern sometimes, not for a career, but for the joy of sharing music without fame. She found that her voice, rediscovered, was strongest when it wasn't trying to impress, but simply to express. She had put her soul before spotlight, and in doing so, had found a light that would never burn out. So the story of the singer loses voice didn't end with a triumphant return to the top of the charts. It ended with something far more profound: a woman finding her true voice after the music stopped. She didn't get the comeback the world wanted. Instead, she got the life she truly needed, a life of love, truth, and a new, quiet strength, proving that sometimes the most beautiful songs are the ones sung far away from the spotlight. And so Zoe's journey comes to a close, not with the roar of a stadium, but with the gentle rhythm of the tides. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest comeback isn't about reclaiming a crown, but about finding the courage to lay it down. It challenges our entire definition of strength, suggesting that true resilience isn't about never falling, but about what we choose to build in the quiet spaces after we break. She had to lose her voice to find her truth, proving that the most authentic song we can sing is the one written from a place of a new song, new self. This story leaves us with a powerful question in our own lives. How often are we performing for an audience instead of living for ourselves? It's a choice between the authenticity over applause that Zoe finally found. Would love to keep this conversation going with you. If her journey from the spotlight to the shoreline resonated with you, please give this video a like. More than that, share what part of the story impacted you the most in the comments below. Was it this simple fisherman's love, her choice to come back or let go, or the moment her voice rediscovered itself by the fire? Did you expect a different ending, or did you love the path she chose? Let us know your thoughts. Every comment helps this community grow. And of course, if you want more stories that go deep and challenge the way we think, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.